Welcome to the Establish the Edge podcast. I'm your host, Mike Leone, back with another edition of the ET offseason projection special with Ben Gretch. You can follow Gretch at Yards Per Gretch on Twitter. Make him one of the 600 tweets that you can see today. And also follow him at Substack, bengretch.substack.com. Check out all my work over at Establish the Run. We've got part 6 of the offseason's projection special for you today, breaking down the NFC South. Gretch, let's get right into it and talk Atlanta. Team that did not serve us well last season. And they, Arthur Smith went full boomer on us in terms of the play calling there. It was slow pace. It was a lot of rushing. Marcus Mariota did not help things, taking sacks and scrambling a decent bit. So the pass volume fell way, way down for them. I think we both expected to be a little bit better this year. I'm still a little bit scared. So we've each got them around 62 offensive plays per game, but you've got them regressing a bit more in the pass rate department at 56%. I've got them at 52% right now.
Yeah, one element there for me was, and I do have in my notes, is my play volume too low? Is my pass rate too high? Or kind of my two notes. And I do come in a little light on play volume and a little high on pass rate. But the designed QB runs fell way, way off with Desmond Ridder. The metric I have it is a ratio of design runs per dropback, but that's not, a design run actually isn't a dropback, so it's not the right way to look at it. It's probably best to look at it per snap, but per dropback, I have it as 0.16 design runs per dropback for Mariota, 0.037 per dropback for Ridder. So like a quarter of the design runs as a ratio of dropbacks. Once they switched QBs last year, which was, notable, right? And something that I think is a positive as they go forward with Ridder this year for the team volume.
Yep. And it is tough though. If you look at and adding to like some positives for them and in the play volume, you talked about the rush stuff. I don't know if you hit on the exact plays per game, if I missed you saying that, Ben, but the plays per game under Ridder was 66.25, small sample size, of course, 4 games. With Mariota, it was 57.4, so a huge discrepancy. So some potential upside in plays per game. PROE still stunk, though, so I think that's part of the reason why we're being so conservative on the pass rate. It's just a little bit scared there. I do think, regardless, their pass attempts should go up, the pass rate should go up, and I think Ridder is probably going to, it's your point, like there's less design runs for him. There's probably less scrambles for him as well. So that's all that's going to help, the pass volume for this game be a little bit more reasonable. And for the guys that we like, we're going to talk about Drake London, Kyle Pitts. They don't have any target competition. They can both have really high target shares. It doesn't need to be even a league average, volume in terms of pass rate for them to get there at their cost, but it does have to be probably better than it was last season. Ridder himself is interesting. I have not drafted a ton of him. I know we're a little concerned that, he might just not be good and that he may not last the whole season here, and Heineke perhaps gets some work. I do sometimes take him as a stacked third QB, though, because you do see the upside. There's a little bit more uncertainty with him at the end of the draft than some of the other guys. So any Ridder takes.
Yeah, I'm excited that they're kind of going forward with him. Heineke, obviously a capable backup, but I've projected them to stick with Ridder basically all year. But yeah, it is an offense that's not going to have a ton of volume. The upside, I think, would depend on how much he actually runs, which he is going to run less than Mariota, it seems, but still, a mobile guy that can scramble a little bit. So it'll be interesting. I don't have any huge Ridder takes. I have been taking him, though, late. I do kind of like his cheap price relative to what I see as some decent upside.
Yeah, he should run more than he did last year. He barely ran last year, just based on his profile and everything. I think, we both expect that to come up, maybe not be as big of a rushing component as maybe when in dynasty drafts when I was taking him. The expectations probably come down a little bit, but wouldn't just assume he's not going to run because he didn't last year. Let's go to Bijan Robinson at running back, and we're pretty bullish on his volume here. Have him at 284 carries. You have him at 248. A lot of the discrepancy there is the discrepancy in our called pass rates, more so than it is the rush share. I do think you have the rush split slightly tighter than we do, given we have the same carries on Algier. But again, a lot of that comes down to the play calling. I think overall for Bijan, people tend to think of these rookies as like higher risk, higher reward. I think with someone like Bijan, that's, historically what we've seen, that's the wrong way to look at it. Like they're actually really low risk when you get these talented backs who are taken super early in the NFL draft. It's pretty hard for this to go bad, especially, in a ground game that was really efficient last year, without a talent like Bijan Robinson at running back. So yeah, seems like a pretty comfortable first round pick. I don't think you're going to get burned. The arguments against him would mostly just be structural in terms of if you want to start a wide receiver instead of him.
Yeah, I remember this time last year when we did these pods, a point I made on Breece Hall that he was a player that I was going to sort of not like a great example of the type of player that I would not put as much weight on the projection for, because it was hard to project him for a monster workload. A little bit of a different story here because Bijan gets so much draft capital. You guys actually are projecting him for quite a large workload, and I think that's probably right. I was a little more conservative and probably like your split better when I look at it. But obviously Algier, talented back behind him. One of the notes I made on the splitting of the rush work was, could Cordarrelle Patterson still see 6 to 8 carries? And if that's the case, what does that mean for Algier or even Bijan? I mean, they do have multiple guys that they like. We'll talk about Patterson and Algier in a minute, but I do like them to use Patterson as a receiver a little bit more this year, like they did in 2021, a little more than they did in 2022. But they could still use him a little as a rusher. But I'm with you where it's like there's not as much risk as it seems. When you get the type of draft capital that Bijan got, you're going to get a lot of work. And then the Breece Hall point was when you saw him play, it was pretty obvious to, it's like it's a talent play, and talent matters more at running back than I think the market sometimes admits. We've talked about that a little bit. With Breece, it was like, look, it doesn't matter if Zach Wilson's not a good quarterback. It doesn't matter what this offense looks like. Like, he looks like he could be a legitimate, immediate superstar running back. And he looked like that for a stretch until he went down. Obviously, we're drafting him on similar bases this year. And that's, I think, the whole case for Bijan at this cost as well. Is like, look, if Breece Hall could have looked like he was going to be a major piece of the 2022 fantasy puzzle, despite Zach Wilson as his quarterback, like, Bijan can overcome circumstances as well. This was a really efficient ground game last year. Arthur Smith knows how to draw up run plays. I mean, that is something that we have to give him credit for. He's done a good job of that dating back to his time in Tennessee, where they were able to create explosive runs there. He created some last year in Atlanta. The offense seems to be a well-designed run blocking scheme to get talented players into space, and yeah, I mean, Bijan Robinson is a talented player, so it looks like it could be a really good fit.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with the home league ADP this year. But I feel like, especially for home leagues, if you want to do a hero RB strategy and you feel like you can get more comfortable at wide receiver, like Bijan's a great pick. It gets a little bit tougher on underdog right now, where it's like, are you going to pass on Stephon Diggs, AJ Brown for him? We've got him like sandwiched in between those two players right now. But it's sort of a structural conversation, but I have no qualms taking Bijan there. You mentioned Algier, who was great last season, and I think he's a pretty good target as a late round running back. We have him as RB46. He's going off as RB48, so not like a monster value, but someone I've definitely clicked where you kind of start, we on the last pod we talked about Devin Singletary. Like, there's that range where after them you start getting into more of like the handcuffy or the free agent type backs, and I'm fine taking Algier. I think the standalone value could be better than people even with this monster split we have with favoring Bijan. Just if this ground game is going to be efficient and a ton of rush attempts, like he can get there some weeks, and the contingent value is great for him. So he's been I don't know if I would say target, but he's definitely been a back that it's been growing on me to take the last few weeks, and I'm pretty comfortable clicking him in the, I don't know, what is that, like the 14th round or so.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I do like the talent. He had some really good advanced metrics last year, but I think, I've clicked Patterson in the last round more because I do think they still like Patterson, are going to use him a decent amount. And it's kept me a little off of Algier because I do like Bijan at the top too. It's hard to like three running backs in the same backfield, even if it is an Arthur Smith offense. But Algier was really good in his own right last year, and his profile is good. Like, it should be good going into year 2. It's just kind of a weird situation that they went and took Bijan in the top 10 when they had found a late round productive running back the year prior. That's just the way it works.
Yeah, and I've noticed you being on CPAT late, and I sort of adjusted some of my strategy to take him in the final round as well, where I think because, our ranks don't love him, but I do find myself sometimes, it's not a clean projection on him, and it's also not a clean narrative on like how he gets there. And I think that keeps people off him. But like you said, if they do start just using him in different ways, he could be one of those round 18 backs that's like you could potentially use their score each week, even if it's not a great role. Whereas a lot of these round 18 backs, you're hoping that something that we don't foresee happens. And then even if like that injury or whatever happens, then you're like still like a coin flip that you have the correct back.
Right.
So definitely some value in best ball in particular with CPAT probably being a part of the offense in some shape or fashion from the get-go.
Yeah.
Let's go to Drake London. I've got 117 targets. You have 122 targets. London on underdog right now is going off at wide receiver 23. I'm fine taking London, but in this passing game, if we're combining wide receiver and tight end, I definitely prefer Pitts by a decent margin. Part of that's the position they play, and part of that's cost. Like last year, I preferred London, and he was like 4 rounds cheaper than Pitts. And now Pitts is 2 rounds cheaper than London. And I'm not so sure there's a ton of difference in terms of how those two players work against each other than there was last year. Other than that, maybe we feel a bit better about London's ability to earn targets. There was more uncertainty there last year, and he showed he can earn them in a big way. So that is a good sign and a plus, but I'm not sure it's worth basically a net 6-round switch from last season if you're looking at the players directly against one another.
Yeah, Pitts falling and London rising. And I mean, Pitts is the sort of higher ADOT guy, even though he's the tight end. And I think that's one sort of interesting way of thinking through it. I like Pitts more. I like the potential. If I'm going to make a bet on the potential volume concerns on the whole offense, I like both the players. The one that pays off more, I think, is the one that is the tight end eligible player at a little bit of a cheaper price. But as you noted, I mean, both of them came out of last year with really strong targets per out run rates and volume earning ability. Pitts was doing a little bit better than London. I mean, London had the really good first couple weeks. Then Pitts had sort of started to really earn more volume than him for a long stretch until his injury. Then London racked up a lot of volume after Pitts was out late to kind of get back to similar full season numbers on a per route basis. But I mean, still for a rookie receiver to have the season he did, London looked really good. I just am kind of noting that because there's a lot of negative feeling around Pitts, and I think it's gone a little bit too far because he still earned volume at a really high rate. The efficiency wasn't where we wanted it to be. It wasn't where it was in year 1, but still looks like a player that can be a pretty important part of fantasy football over the next couple seasons as a tight end who plays a lot of wide receiver, splits out, very athletic, strong production profile going back to college, still very young, was 20 turning 21 when he had his 1,000-yard season as a rookie, 21 turning 22 last year. He'll be 22 into the regular season this year and turn 23 after I think about week 4. Still very young, still plenty of room to be like, oh, yeah, he had a little bit of a sophomore slump on the efficiency standpoint, but he bounces back and goes on to be a really good player long-term in the NFL, which at tight end, the type of upside he can bring is a big, big deal. So I still really like making the bet on him this year. I'm right back in. I'm a sucker. It cost me a lot of money last year, but I'm right back in taking a lot of him.
I mean, I'm in. Last year at cost, I was kind of out by the end of draft season, but this year the cost is so different. And for me, I don't know if a ton has changed because I was kind of worried about the pass rate last year. So like it's the same concerns for me. A little bit larger concerns because we actually saw the pass rate and how bad it can be. But like I'm in, he's going to be one of my highest exposure tight ends this season for sure. And I kind of thought as the draft season went on, his ADP would rise a decent bit, and we'd get some steam on Pitts, and it might still happen. But as of now, it's sort of going the other way. Like not a lot, but like you can get 7th round Kyle Pitts, and it's like especially on DraftKings, and I'm just taking that gamble. I mean, you talk about like small loss, big hit. That's more Pitts to me than it is London. And I don't want to sound too bearish on London because I know in JJ Zachariason's prospect profile stuff, his year 2 stuff, he's got London's, Z score at like Olave and Garrett Wilson numbers, like kind of in the same tier. But I think London's more at risk of the play calling stuff at his cost, where it's like he's more of like small hit, big miss potentially at wide receiver at the 3-4 turn versus Pitts at the 6-7 turn at tight end. So these guys have no competition for targets, which is the great thing. If you do get like a sea change at play calling, Ben, you've talked about sometimes we're just way wrong. If we happen to be way wrong, you see the ceiling for both of them because we have Mac Hollins as the wide receiver 2. They've got Scotty Miller, Cottrell Hodge. They did bring over Jonnu Smith in free agencies, maybe see some 2 tight end stuff, but there's no depth here. Like it's the offense is operating through these 2 guys in terms of the aerial game.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at last year, you can kind of transplant some of the 2023 receivers into the 2022 roles. Like they had Damiere Byrd as kind of a deep threat. Scott Miller kind of fits that. Mac Hollins probably is like the Olamide Zaccheaus in terms of like route share and everything. But when you see Jonnu Smith there, I mean, it feels pretty comfortable to say that Pitts is going to continue to play a lot of wide receiver because behind Drake London, you're talking about, again, Mac Hollins, Scott Miller, Kadero Hodge. And then also I mentioned it with Cordell Patterson. That's another big part of why I think Patterson's interesting. They'll rotate. They're not going to use Patterson as like an every down wide receiver, but I think they will split him out, 10 snaps a game or something like that and let him run some downfield routes and potentially hit on some downfield plays. So these other receivers to me, not really interesting because I do think you're going to see, like you said, the 2 tight end sets that are going to split Pitts out. You're going to see a running back or a listed running back in terms of fantasy football, Cordell Patterson taking some of these wide receiver routes. And then the guys that are there, Hollins, Miller, they're not dudes that have shown a lot in terms of what their, upside might be in a lower volume passing offense. Hollins had a decent year last year, but it was, a crazy kind of season with the Raiders where everything was very concentrated on Adams and Jacobs. And they didn't really, he ended up being sort of their third scorer in fantasy, but he's about a 30-year-old now, and that was a career season for him. Doesn't look like a guy that's going to, continue to produce even at that level, which is, I think, about a 600, 800-yard season, not like a 1,000-yard season or anything. So, yeah, I'm with you. I mean, you're looking at this being very concentrated, and I the London thing is so interesting. I'm right with you. I want to have some, but he's a tough price.
Yeah, let's go to New Orleans. We've got them below average in terms of plays at a little bit over between like 62 and 65 plays per game. We're pretty similar there. The ETR pass rate projection slightly more bullish at 59%. Then you're at 57.5%. We kind of think they could pass more, but there's really nothing too much in the data to like support that. It's a little bit of a feel thing. I think that's a pretty good range. And I'd be surprised if they were too far outlier one way or the other. as how that flows through to Derek Carr, I've got him as like, if you've got Olave or Michael Thomas and you're going to stack and you need a quarterback, like Carr's fine. I don't really have too much to add to that. I don't think there's really.
I've taken him some because he's one of the few quarterbacks that I think just the way quarterback prices are up this year, and even when in the like 9th, 10th round, you start to have to pay pretty aggressive prices on the Tua, Geno, even like Jared Goff's like an 11th round pick. Carr's one of the few that you can get like in the 13th and 14th. So if you did take Olave, like I'd take him some, but it's not because I like Carr, but his price is at least palatable.
We've got pretty similar splits on Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller. As far as total fantasy points scored, we've got Kamara about 150 full PPR points, Jamal Williams around 120, Kendre Miller around 90. As far as how I'm approaching this backfield, I've gotten the most of Kendre Miller because he's the cheapest and he's the rookie, and I've taken swings. I don't know how I feel about it. I feel pretty good about being out on Kamara, even though the price tag isn't that high, but just it seems like very likely you're getting a suspension to start. He's starting to age out a little bit, and it's a bit of a tough sell for me, even with the price tag only being like RB31. And then Jamal Williams to me is in the middle where it's like, if I need a running back at that point in time, I'll click Jamal. Jamal and Kendre, should swing off each other a decent bit. Like those are two I'm probably not taking on the same team together, just because I think there's, I guess a positive correlation would be a bet against Kamara, but I think Kendrick's going to, show up as a rookie and earn the playing time, and it'll be great for him, or he's not, and it's going to be another season where Jamal Williams is a strong value.
Yeah, I've been making the Miller bet more, in part because I feel like Williams is, he had the huge touchdown rate last year, but only 4.1 yards per carry. Now, some of that's unfair because a lot of his carries ended up in the end zone. So, like you see, when you're short yardage back, you don't have a lot of room to run on some of those plays when you actually score. But he wasn't like great in success rate, wasn't super productive other than the touchdowns. And I think, going into last year, we didn't really have a great opinion on Williams. I look at this layout, I'm like, I think Kamara probably gets suspended, but I want to make the bet, I think, on Miller, who isn't a really interesting prospect. But anyway, I do have Williams projected for more work when I'm looking here at our projections. He's gonna produce. I just don't really see the real bull case for Williams. On Kamara, I will say, like, he still had a strong receiving profile last year, over 6 yards per target, which is a positive. About six yards per target is the average for a running back. He was at 6.3. He was at 6.6 the year prior, 6.9 the year prior to that. He's been, consistently solid still in the receiving game, even if with the added rush work the last couple of years, his rush efficiency has fallen off. So I actually kind of am interested in him a little bit at his price, where, the suspension is a significant concern, but it's pushed him down like outside that wide receiver window into like this, early double digit round range. I think his ADP is right around 100. I've gotten him like as late as 120 sometimes, though.
He's got probably a lot of variance
than
the average player at his ADP, so that makes sense.
Right. He'll fall significantly sometimes. But I don't know. I've kind of struggled with him. I'm not like usually into backs that we start to see some skills decline. We started to see some decline in his rushing efficiency. But if he gets back to like a lower rush workload, more receiving work, we know Derek Carr throws to the back a lot. Mm-hmm. He obviously did last year for Josh Jacobs. I actually kind of like him as, even if he's only playing half the season, as like a late season receiving back hammer, almost like early career Alvin Kamara, when he had, a really interesting profile when his touch mix was more towards the high value touches. I'm not like in love with that, but I've at least been able to tell myself a story. I struggle sometimes to tell myself a story with these older guys sometimes.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Going over to wide receiver right now, Olave to me, of the year 2 wide receivers, like that main trio of him, Garrett Wilson, and Drake London, he's probably my favorite at cost. It's a trio that, historically, like you'd want to be in on all of them, but the market's just gotten sharper in terms of drafting these guys ahead of seeing it. And I think I prefer him to Wilson, certainly at cost, kind of not that, I mean, the cost almost doesn't come into play because you're not really ever at a point in the draft where you're deciding between these two players. But in terms of who I'll have more exposure to, Olave, because he's cheaper and there's some stuff that might even be better for him in terms of like a domed environment. And well, I guess that's probably about it. But
Yeah.
you've got him for 135 targets. We've got him for 132 targets. Really, some really good rookie stuff in terms of the, Whopper stuff in terms of like air yards and target share for Olave. You do have Michael Thomas maybe coming back for the whole season, whereas last year he only had him for the first couple of games. But I don't know if that's a huge concern one way or the other. You're hoping that Olave's a 24%-ish target share guy who's getting some downfield looks. So even if Michael Thomas is this kind of possession receiver he's been in the past, I think that's fine for Olave. It's not really gonna hurt his stock too much.
Yeah, my note here is Thomas's targets per outrun, yards per outrun fell quite a bit last year, but they still look okay. They were obviously really, really high from when he was at his dominant level. But that note, what I added was that Olave has room to smash again. So yeah, I mean, basically exactly what you just said. If I think there's room for Olave to beat this projection that we both have, a pretty similar projection here. For Thomas, I think it's easy to go, yeah, he was the overall wide receiver 1 at one point, but I actually look at my projection for him, 101 targets, a pretty solid season. I feel like there's mostly downside for his projection just based on his games played risk and not really knowing what he is. And the fact that some of his stuff did fall a little bit last year. I mean, maybe there's upside for him to get back to something we haven't seen for several seasons now. But I think that's a little bit of a pipe dream. It is hard for guys to recapture that 3-4 years down the road. Anyway, yeah, I think there's maybe more downside risk on him.
I guess the best part about Michael Thomas is just like he's at the end of that wide receiver window, and I think he's probably inside it. If you don't want to take the guys that like project well, but we're worried about in terms of like Juju Smith-Schuster, Zay Jones, you have to draft Michael Thomas before those guys. But if you do that, it may turn a wide receiver pick that would have been Juju or one of the other guys, Zay, into a running back, where the running backs are a little bit more appealing bets at that point in the draft. The only other receiver really to talk about is, we'll talk more at tight end, but for receiver, Rashid Shaheed, who had, flashed in terms of efficiency in a fun way. Hard to really project him for meaningful volume. So I'm curious what you're doing with him.
I think he's interesting. I've added him late to Saint stacks when I've done like Olave and taken Carr. I think the upside for him is, again, it's sort of similar to everything I was saying with Thomas. Like if Thomas is running a ton of routes and at least has the very solid targets per hour, maybe not back to his elite levels, but is solid and is eating up a lot of volume. And then Olave is obviously the presence he is. Kamara comes back from the suspension and continues to earn a lot of volume for a running back. It's tough for Shaheed. But if Thomas isn't that guy or isn't playing, then there's a lot of room for Shaheed to beat this ADP and to be a solid year 2 guy. He had a pretty strong year 1. I mean, an interesting profile for sure.
At tight end, I mean, I'll take my big L on Taysom. Last year, I really didn't think it was a worthwhile pick. And, he did flash that weekly ceiling at tight end that, a lot of tight ends don't have, even if his volume is super at risk from week to week. He's someone that quite literally in DFS breaks our projections when we do some of like our ceiling stuff and whatnot, whether he's labeled at tight end or quarterback, but he is very tough to project in general. And as a result, I don't have any hot Taysom takes this year. I was out on him last year. This year, if I need a tight end in the range where his ADP is, I've been fine taking him. I know I really don't have a strong take. I've also been taking Juwan Johnson, but I'm starting to get slightly worried that, with Foster Moreau getting cleared, which is great news, that could cut into Johnson like maybe a little bit more than expected. Not that Johnson's that expensive. He's like around 16 type tight end. But what are you doing with the Saints tight ends?
Yeah, I think Johnson's another one that could benefit from what I was describing with Thomas, especially because he's, potentially operating in the same sort of short to intermediate range. If Michael Thomas isn't really hitting, then I think Juwan Johnson has a path to being a very viable, more athletic tight end that might do some more stand-up stuff, more slot and out wide stuff even. I'm interested in him and the stuff you said, Taysom. He breaks my projection spreadsheet. I had to put him in as a QB2 and as a tight end, and then combine it and because I don't have any way for my tight ends to get passing stats, but I gave him a couple pass attempts, obviously. Last year, he actually, there was a conversation about, hey, Sean Payton's not going to be there anymore. Are they going to use him as much? He set a career high in rush attempts. He set a career high in rushing yardage. He was as involved as ever. I think, Alvin Kamara, possible suspension looming. You have to expect that they're going to use Taysom Hill. I think there's plenty of work lined up for him when you look at it. Threw some passes last year, as I said. It's funny, he's a tight end because he didn't actually catch many balls. He caught 9 passes all last year. That's the part of it that he probably doesn't actually catch a ton of balls, but he's going to run. He had 96 carries last year. He's probably going to get at least 50 to 70 carries at minimum, right? It's hard not to project him for that, and then throw some, probably catch a ball every other week or whatever it is. But you have a lot of paths there, especially with the goal line stuff, whereas he can run the really high TD rates. As far as tight end goes, late round, there's not a lot of guys that can offer that type of scoring potential. And
there's some weird outcomes too, where he just does a ton. Derek Carr gets hurt and they have to do. There's just some weird tail outcomes that maybe are pretty low percentage, but they exist. Your point about him not catching a lot of balls, he will be someone whose value is pretty different than between format, because as you get into full PPR or tight end premium, I talked to some casual players tight end premium, let's Taysom Hill. And I'm like, no, he's way worse than tight end premium because he doesn't catch any balls, which I think most people listening to the show get and is obvious, but it is something considering where that weekly upside on underdog where it's half PPR, some tight end that's going 3 for 35, it doesn't really matter. You get an FFPC, the 3 catches is 4.5 points compared to 1.5 points. And that's half a touchdown.
Yep.
Let's go to Tampa Bay, and we have them coming down a ton in plays and a ton in pass rate. And this one's kind of crazy how close we are on play calling, given that this is very subjective and a complete guess. But with Brady gone, just expecting this to be kind of like your traditional bad offense, which is a little bit slow paced and about 60% pass rate, which is going to be probably negative in PROE or about break even in PROE. So that's needs to be taken into account. What I've seen on the market is they've taken it into account and then some. I actually kind of like Tampa Bay a little bit as a stack. And you've got a pretty bullish passing line on Mayfield. The prices on Evans and Godwin have started to come up a little bit, but to start the draft season, they're going the 70s. And I still like them. I don't want to get ahead of myself because we'll talk about them. But long story short, I think even after taking into account a sea change in play calling, there's a little bit of value here. Baker can just be semi-decent. Can he be semi-decent? I don't know. You tell me, Ben.
Yeah, probably not. I'm probably just going to watch him throw the ball into the back of his lineman all season long. But you got to slow this team way down from last year's projection. You have to cut their pass rate because they were abnormally high last year. And yet, you look at their running backs, Rachaad White is interesting. We'll get to him too, but not very efficient last year and not a lot of depth at that position right now. This is a team that has a poor win total, doesn't project to be, leaving games and salting it away. how run heavy can this team be? I mean, the market seems to believe that because Brady's gone, they're suddenly going to be like bottom 5 in pass volume. They don't have a mobile quarterback, right? Baker's going to stand back there and throw. He's going to take some hits. He's going to take some sacks. And like I said, he's going to hit the back of his offensive lineman's head a few times, but he's going to also throw the ball more than, a mobile quarterback will. There's going to be pass volume here. And Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are certified good NFL wide receivers. So, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in on the pass game. I think I do come out more bullish on Mayfield than I want to. But, I mean, if you look at it from his perspective, played decent down the stretch with the Rams at times. And now, I mean, he's getting to play with probably the best weaponry that he's ever played with at the NFL level.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm about to take him like as very late round quarterback in like one of my high stakes drafts where I got shot out of quarterback a little bit and then take a 3 quarterback. I've got Godwin early and it kind of works out. You're obviously not building draft strategies around him, but I do think he's okay as a backdoor stack guy. Let's go to running back. Rachaad White is, last year, he's going about where he went last year. Last year, he's going a little bit earlier. But we loved Rachaad White as kind of like the 0 RB candidate, right? Like, let's make this bet against Leonard Fournette, take Rachaad White. And it worked out a little bit, except the offense was bad and Rachaad White was kind of bad. Hard to sort of extricate like who's at fault there if both things, true at the same time. And now you're expecting the offense to be bad this year just from the get-go with Brady gone and Baker there and some of the Vegas stuff you mentioned, Ben. So mixed bag with White. You certainly are getting a decent bit of projectable volume in like round 8 though, or round 7 or 8.
But I mean, in my projection, I projected like we talk sometimes. You set aside like unallocated volume. I tend to allocate it all, but on this team, I set aside a role that just says Tampa Bay free agent running back, and I made a note that I said a free agent running back is going to land here when it becomes clear they can't get a job on a better team. I feel like that's where we're headed. I mean, they brought in Chase Edmonds, they brought in UDFA, Sean Tucker. Who looks like a decent prospect, if not for some health stuff. And we don't know exactly how healthy he's going to be. They still have Keyshawn Vaughn behind White. But, like, one of the big reasons Fournette got used as much as he did is, like, White didn't actually – I was really in on White, but he didn't actually go and take that job. And White was a prospect that was a little bit older. One of the issues with him in the Dynasty community looked like he had a 3-down profile, looked like he had the size and athleticism, but he's like 24 as a rookie last year. Somebody's a little bit older, and you have a little bit of a concern about how many years he's going to be super productive. You want him to be productive early to just get that age exactly right. He turned 24 in January of this year, so he was actually 23 last year, but turned 24 early in 2023. I mean, he's him not hitting at a kind of an advanced age and was supposed to be sort of a ready-made prospect is, I think, a little bit of a concern about his talent level. And when you talk about the projectable volume, I mean, if a Zeke landed there or a Kareem Hunt or a whichever back that it could potentially be, I think we would immediately scale that projectable volume back. And that to me is a pretty fragile projection when you're like, yeah, well, if I do play this mental game where I say, okay, Kareem Hunt lands there, how will I project this? Well, I'd probably project a significant drop-off for White's volume.
Yeah, those are really good points. It also, in addition to making me a little bit more scared on White there, it makes me kind of cross Sean Tucker off a little bit as someone who I have been drafting at the very end of drafts, just because you mentioned like there's some interesting prospect profile, but seems like a long shot bet to begin with. And now if you're going to add in like, oh, this team's like kind of prime for free agent, it becomes, that much tougher. Let's go to wide receiver, where I think Godwin and Evans are pretty decent values right now. I try not to overload them with volume too much, but it's hard because like they're talented wide receivers. They don't have competition. And in particular, I could see Godwin really, I think he has a really high ceiling on his targets this year. If they're bad and they're throwing short a lot, I could see that the volume getting there in a pretty big way to offset any sort of efficiency concerns. You've got 134 targets for Godwin, 118 for Evans. We're slightly more conservative with 117 for Godwin and 103 for Evans. Similar split between the two. The way it spits out, in half PPR have the two fairly close, but in full PPR, a bit more of a gap in favor of Chris Godwin over Evans. You've got Godwin a little bit more ahead of Evans in fantasy points regardless. But yeah, I like both of them right now. Godwin, especially on underdog, even though it's only half PPR scoring, just seems to be someone that is still in that, quote unquote RB dead zone that, we're not sure if it still exists, but you look, he's going around guys like Miles Sanders and whatnot. And sometimes I just need a wide receiver there, and I'm really comfortable taking Godwin.
Yeah, I've liked both of these guys and have taken a decent amount of both. Godwin early in his career did a little bit more vertical, a little bit more downfield. The last couple of years with Brady there, his ADOT has been a lot lower. He's been very efficient at both depths. I've talked about this depth-adjusted racer that I use some on the show. When I do my receiving volume, I use the air yard conversion ratio racer, but I adjust for ADOT because it's a little bit different at different depths. Godwin has been very efficient by depth-adjusted racer at multiple depths, basically every year, like solidly efficient. Like he's just a good player. He adds yak at all depths, and he's able to win at all depths. Evans, another guy who's been strong. Some of that is they've played with, the greatest quarterback of all time these last couple of years, and they're going to be going to a quarterback who has actually hurt his receivers' efficiency at times throughout his career, certainly. So there is, risk in their efficiency that it falls off, but I feel very confident both in their target earning ability, both of these players at the various depths that they operate at, and their efficiency after the target. I just think they're both really talented receivers. And like you said, not a ton of competition. And I just think they're getting too discounted to the Brady retirement, or because of the Brady retirement. Evans, even more so. And I've been happy to take them both together on underdog somewhere. Like if I'm making the bet on Godwin, I think what I'm making is a bet on the offense, not being catastrophically bad, not, being able to have some pass volume and some production. And so even if I don't wind up taking Baker, I think you can make a directional bet on Evans at the same time. If Godwin's a good bet at his ADP, then Evans is probably a good bet the next round. And a lot of times it's like a fifth, mid-round, mid-fifth, early fifth pick on Godwin, and then a mid to late sixth on Evans. And I'll just stack them together and make a bet on Tampa's passing environment being vaguely good. Because if it is, they're both better than their ADPs, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, because it's not just projectable volume, right? Like they should earn that type of volume based on their talent and the players around them. It's just like, will they just be that bad efficiency wise as an offense? So that makes a ton of sense to me. And you'd obviously rather stack Baker with those guys, but like you can do a cheap backdoor double on like these 20 round drafts on FFPC or DraftKings with Russell Gage. I mean, I don't really like to do it with Gage, but he can be a unique player who I think is somewhat clearly their wide receiver 3, and then Cade Otton at tight end. I don't have a lot to say about Cade Otton. It's one of those things where it seems like you're getting a starting tight end super late, which is why some of these like 3 tight end, even 4 tight end builds on the 20 round drafts do make a little bit of sense this time of year.
Yeah, his targets per run not strong last year, but you're right. He could run a ton of routes. Him and Gage, my note is they're the only other real players you can even project for like solid roles, for much work in this passing game outside of Godwin and Evans. I think beyond that, you're looking at some interesting names at tight end, at wide receiver. I think the next name you're looking at is the rookie Trey Palmer, who I kind of like, but he's more of a vertical threat. And he's a day 3 guy. He's probably not going to make a huge splash right away. And Gage and Otton, I mean, I think, like you said, you can probably mix them in as kind of this co-third weapon in the passing game at the same time. Like, they're not huge threats to Godwin and Evans, which we were emphasizing. So if this passing game does have volume, I mean, somebody's going to be valuable here. It should be pretty concentrated.
Let's go to Carolina. And, the previous episode, we talked about CJ Stroud in Houston and how it's kind of tough, where it's like, at least for me, I want to take advantage of uncertain situations where like we could maybe get an outsized return if the quarterback's really good. And same thing with Carolina, where you want that, but you're also fighting that in general, these offenses are kind of boring and don't have a ton of upside for the skill players with these rookie quarterbacks, even if they're decent. So That's what we're looking at with Carolina. We've each got them at about 62.5 plays per game. I've got them slightly higher in pass rate at 59.6%. You have them at 58%, but probably in that range. Reich, obviously personnel had something to do with this, but with the Colts, he was a pretty run heavy coach. The pace stuff was tougher to figure out because it seemed like it was really kind of quarterback dependent over his years there. But the team's going to be bad. So when the team's bad, they're just not running as many plays as the good offenses.
Yeah. Shout out Pat Thorman again. He wrote about Reich's tempos in the past fitting the quarterback in his great pace piece. I talked on the last show when we went over the Colts about I was kind of admiring Reich for fitting his tendencies to his offense. I think that's the right way to approach it as a coach. I do think because of that, there's some potential that basically what I'm projecting is it will be sort of slow paced early, but working into a faster paced setup because Young did some of that in college. And I think Reich will think that he can handle it as a top overall pick. And so later in the year, we could get some stuff. The problem for me, like I do think there can be a little bit of volume here, but and as you noted, his PROEs in the past, Reich's have been negative, and I do expect a negative PROE here. Problem for me with Young is I just don't see. I just don't feel like he has much to work with in terms of all of the receiving weapons and options. There's just not a lot of exciting profiles here that I can talk myself into being the guys that elevate him on the receiving end. I think this is a pretty poorly constructed receiving core.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. At running back, Miles Sanders, a difficult guy to project. He is, as I just sort of referenced with the Godwin thing, kind of like a dead zone-y running back. But again, it's now round 6 that you're getting him. I see pros and cons. Ultimately, I don't have a ton because it's, pretty it seems volume dependent back on an offense that we're worried about. The pros for Sanders would be, his rushing efficiency historically is strong. Some of that's playing alongside Jalen Hurts, but even the year before Hurts, he was at 5.3 yards per carry. And then he does have his rookie season where he had 50 catches. And I think his receiving role should grow a ton going from the Jalen Hurts offense to this offense with Bryce Young. How much that grows, I think, is really kind of the crux of whether or not he's a good pick, right? We've got him each at 43 targets and 31 to 32 catches. Could he catch 45 to 50 balls? I'm not sure. If he can, he's a pretty good pick right here. If he's going to catch less than 30 balls, it's not the type of bet you want to. You don't want to bet on rushing volume for a bad team. It's some Damian Pierce-esque vibes in terms of how the volume shakes out the way we've projected him, Ben, and how just many fantasy points the offense might score.
I think you put that all incredibly well. He's always been a really efficient runner, which I think has been helped by Jalen Hurts, obviously. One note just to keep in mind, I guess, is that last year, Bryce Young's highest, receptions teammate at Alabama, highest receiving player in terms of receptions, not yardage, was Jahmyr Gibbs, top prospect and running back for the Lions now. So, a slightly positive note that he might be checking down to the running backs a little bit. On the flip side, if the the Panthers plan to use Laviska Shenault at all, he could cut into the running back target share a little bit in the way that maybe Tyreek Hill does a little bit in Miami. Obviously, that's not a Visca Tyreek comparison, but targets around the line of scrimmage.
Clip it.
Targets around the line of scrimmage can cut into the running back target share a little bit. And that Visca got some of that last year. It won't be clear if they'll use that this year if Reich wants to do that. But, that could be one potential cap on the overall running back targets. But, yeah, I think you kind of hit on Sanders. If he gets the receiving work, he could be really interesting.
Yeah, so it's tough. I've definitely taken more of Chuba Hubbard late thus far, where I think he's kind of a clear handcuff. And then also with the Miles Sanders receiving uncertainty, if Chuba takes some pass volume and has worked in. And if you think he has some standalone value, just kind of anytime you can get it back real late that has some semblance of standalone value and is the clear handcuff, like I'm usually interested in those types of backs.
For sure. No brainer there.
Wide receiver, as
last
you
year.
mentioned. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say he had an efficient second season after not a very efficient rookie year, which is great to see from a talent upside perspective as well.
Wide receiver, it's ugly, as you said. I feel like the market has chased this Mingo thing a little bit where it's like, oh, it's a rookie with a ton of target upside. And like, I've struggled to get, I'm not like totally against Mingo, but again, just some of the systemic stuff with rookie quarterbacks and like the upside seasons we see from wide receivers not being great in general. And just some uncertainty over how good Mingo is. Like, it's one of those things where there were better wide receiver prospects, and are we just sort of kind of thrusting them up the board because we see rookie and we see the potential for targets? But aside from him, you've got Adam Thielen, who really looks like he's dust. I know we took an under on a pretty low yardage line for him for the ETR official season long props, and I just don't see it with Thielen. The guy I've taken most is kind of Chark, where he's got more upside than Thielen, I feel like, and like a little more established in Mingo, and he goes later than both of those guys currently.
Yeah, I like that take. Mingo is a guy who didn't really do anything until he was a senior in college, which is one of those sort of red flags on a profile. He's got great athleticism, but we want to see more early career production than we saw from him. So not my favorite prospect in this class to project forward to the next level, to be like a big volume earner. I think he can make some splashy plays and those types of things, but difficult to see him being a monster. You mentioned Thielen. His peripherals have really cratered, and especially last year, he covered that up a little bit because he ran a career high 674 routes. Just a monster number. He's only been within 100 routes of that one other time. So that helped him a little bit, but I mean, his yards per out run was down to a 1.06. The year prior, it had already fallen off from his prime, which was like 2+ yards per out run. In 2021, it was 1.63. So it was already falling, but it was still like, maybe viable. Falls all the way to 1.06 last year. Just looks like a guy who's probably done, as you said. DJ Chark is the interesting one. If you want to tell yourself something about the per route peripherals and those types of things, he's the one that I do take. If I make a Bryce Young stack, I almost have to have Chark. I can maybe take one of the other guys, but the only other profile that's even moderately interesting to me is actually Terrace Marshall, who was kind of an interesting rookie, had a really poor rookie year, and then in the second season he at least did enough to get back to where it's like, okay, maybe there's something here. Because usually when you have the rookie year that he had, it's a pretty bad sign. You're kind of done. It's hard to come back from that poor of a rookie season. He did, and he earned volume at a much higher rate and was efficient and improved basically across the board. If people don't remember his prospect profile, he played at LSU with both Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. So we didn't know a ton about him, but was productive in limited sample when he got a chance to play when they weren't on the field. Otherwise, he was being outshined by who are the two best receivers in the NFL at this point. So maybe there's something there with him. And then obviously Visca, that's another guy that, I liked a lot in the past. He's a guy I've had to kind of take an L on. He's probably not going to ever be anything. But you have just a lot of I don't knows, and a lot and that don't look great necessarily. Aren't bets that you'd really want to make. If these players were in a passing game with a player that I did want to bet, I would bet that player heavier because they were sharing a passing game with guys like this. Because I'd be like, oh, I feel like he has more of a path to consolidate. But there's no one here that I really think, other than maybe Chark. He's the one that is most exciting, I think.
Yeah, and Ben and I each have Chark with 86 targets to lead the team for Carolina. So we're opposite ADP there, where Chark actually goes the lowest of the main three wide receivers. And not to belabor the Adam Thielen bashing, but in addition to some of his value coming from just running a ton of routes last year, historically, especially the last 5 years or so, a lot of values come from touchdowns too. And obviously the touchdown rate's gonna come down in an offense like this compared to the offenses that he was playing with in Minnesota. Going to tight end, we're a bit more bullish on Hayden Hurst, have him at 75 targets, you have him at 59. Essentially, we gave him the 14% target share he had with Cincinnati. And like, I try to like slash his upside case a decent bit, but I do end up with him as in that collection of late round tight ends that I'm, kind of comfortable taking, round 17 or 18, just because I think he's going to be out there and going to play. How do you see, Tommy Tremble has flashed like a little bit at times, but it just doesn't seem like he's going to earn significant volume as the tight end too.
Yeah, the concern I have with Hurst is just the right tendencies again, and it might be overstating it, but the way that he always rotated tight ends, it seemed by situational stuff in Indianapolis. Not a lot of depth here. Maybe he won't rotate as much because they brought in this veteran Hayden Hurst that should be sort of the clear number one, but I kind of we ran into this when we were talking about the Colts, where I had Jelani Woods projected more like a traditional, number one tight end, because I think these trends are maybe more going to go with Reich to Carolina. And here I'm kind of expecting it to be a little more balanced between the three, where he's running different tight ends, different routes, rates. I don't know that I love that take, but Hurst is already sort of a fringe, in that mix for the late round tight ends, as you said. And so for me, I've used it as sort of the tipping point to not take a lot of him in that group.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Something probably look into a little bit more the ETR team, just to see how convinced we are that those trends will or will not carry over. So that's a great context call out. And we will end on that note. Six divisions down. We've got the AFC West and NFC West up, to pretty fun divisions to close things out. So we'll get those out to you over the next week or two. But yeah, make sure to follow Ben at Yards Per Gretch on Twitter, his Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. You can follow me at 2hats1mike on Twitter, and also see all my stuff over at Establish the Run. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Really appreciate the support.